Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's April the 24th, 2025, and just around the corner is a important federal election. And it's great to see everybody. Good afternoon. And of course, Prairie's there. So a warm welcome to everybody for joining us. We've got a quite a jam-packed day today as we go through a myriad of important policy issues that matter to Canadians and the building of this incredible country. So we're grateful that we can help serve our audience with both information and discussion. And we appreciate your discussion as an audience with your comments and your questions from coast to coast to coast. So I want to tell you that I am very excited about the discussion today because we've got two very special guests and they're going to join us in a minute. And I can't think of, we were just so fortunate. We have some very special people who join us, and it is incredible. And that's right, Matthew. It's 4 more days till D-Day, depending on your perspective. So, what do you think is going to happen? I'm curious about your predictions. What are the most important issues? We're going to be talking about a number of them today. We're also going to make some very special announcements at the Frontier Center for Public Policy. Recall that we are about serving Canadians with better public policy that serves you, that empowers you, that is principled, that follows ideas of, well, accountability, transparency, subsidiarity, the whole idea that we should get services from a government closest to the people so that they are empowered with control over their lives within those great traditions that respect democratic freedoms and individual rights as well. So this is a very important time. I see a lot of comments coming in, and we are going to get into a number of the headlines first. And of course, we have this last Monday, the passing of Pope Francis. And it is certainly with sorrow that we recognized his passing and certainly his impact on the world in terms of heading up one of the largest, well, Christian denominations. And there he is. Unfortunately, I had not the occasion to meet Pope Francis, but it's a very interesting issues, that role and the impact that they have in Christendom and beyond. So we certainly want to acknowledge that. I also want to mention that this past weekend we had a record 7.3 million Canadians voted in advance polls. Did you vote? And are you planning on voting? Are you registered? So the Easter long weekend saw a record 7.3 million Canadians vote in advance polls. And what does that say? Does that say that people care about this election? I think it does. Beyond that, I think there's different theories about the significance of that. We also know that there's a lot of changes in our economy. I don't know about you, but I feel a little bit of grief in terms of the passing of the Hudson's Bay Company. I know that they're going to continue, but a number of their stores across the country are closing and as they stave off bankruptcy. And there's a lot of employees that are impacted by that. And if you're one of them, we certainly are thinking of you. But that's part of our economy, and it's interesting. What is the role of those bricks and mortar companies? So there's some predictions here. Prairie thinks PP, I assume that's Pierre Poilievre, is going to win hands down. So that's interesting. Sherry says, I keep hearing that Liberals will be taking the election with a majority. This doesn't sound quite right or sound right from what I see on the ground, and I don't look at the polls. Okay, well, thank you, Sherry, for that comment. And Matthew is saying 100%. And we have Walt say, I think people's minds may have been changed after the debates, Kamala Harris style. So I think that's an interesting reference, Walt, to the whole idea that there was a lot of, certainly looking at the US, a lot of polls that suggested that Kamala Harris was neck and neck or going to win, when in fact it was just the opposite. So yeah, we'll have to wait and see. And it's good that people are thinking. In other news, I noticed that Google was found guilty in the US, a ruling in antitrust case. And so that's very interesting that in the US, under antitrust law, there's a lot of changes in big tech. And of course, there's been a lot of concerns about, I would say kind of the almost the monopolistic impact that big tech has on our lives. And Canadians are not excluded from that. So it's an interesting question. What do you think about that? In the meantime, the U.S. continues to undertake trade negotiations. Apparently, the Commerce Secretary there, Howard Lutnick, said 90 countries are they've been speaking with 90 countries on trade tariffs, and so it's interesting to see where Canada will fit into that. There is an interesting graph that we could bring up here, Madam Producer, that shows the flags of different countries, and it's interesting how it begs the question about how we're being traded. There's one simple representation here. It obviously doesn't include all 90, but there's those that are negotiating to trade, offered concessions, no retaliation. And then in that right-hand bar, those that have retaliated include China, the People's Republic of China, and Canada. So we're kind of in a class unto ourselves with China. So we're a little bit isolated there with them. Is that a good thing? Well, I suspect it isn't. But what we want to do is obviously position for successful negotiations, whoever is in office, and hopefully we don't miss the party, so to speak, and be able to move our economy forward. It's interesting. There's another comment here. David, how do so many people not hear Carney was the economic advisor for 5 years now and still think he's the man for our economy? That's a really great question. Chicken Cheston, I think is the name here. That's a good question. Is that there's actually a lot of information that's come out about Mark Carney's work, including his book. I think you may have read it, but that's an interesting question. That his role within the Trudeau administration is certainly well known to I think a lot of people. But yeah, it's a good question that you ask. Jimmy Zoo said, when 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 do people open their eyes? I think is the question there. I also wanted to highlight that Jagmeet Singh said this week that Canada needs closure. He was quoted as saying that Canadian shame over Indian residential schools must result in, quote, real closure and healing. New Democrat leader Jagmeet Singh said yesterday, speaking by video conference with the Assembly of First Nations. Singh made no mention of a new Democrat bill to criminalize residential school denialism. So that's a very interesting headline. And we know that healthy debate is very important. So how does that happen if you are criminalized based on a variety of opinions regarding, in fact, the facts regarding residential schools? So that's a very important topic to discuss. We've also seen continued accusations and concerns regarding foreign interference. I believe there's a case here that we want to bring up regarding a candidate that has stopped in-person campaigning amid Chinese threats. And so this is a very interesting thing. I don't think I've seen this before in a Canadian election where overt interference from another power, in this case, China, has been so public. I'm curious what you're seeing, but this is one of many, many examples. And it's certainly very concerning. What country tolerates that kind of foreign interference? Maria says, Chinese interference, why is it not being talked about? And I think that's a good question. So we have a lot to discuss today about the election, and I'm very excited to welcome then our two guests here on our panel, and that is, of course, Barbara Kay, who's a columnist. You may appreciate her columns as much as I do with the National Post, and a warm welcome to you, Barbara Kay.
Thank you, David.
And of course, the Dr. Marco Navarro-Genie, he's the Vice President of Policy and Research at Frontier, and a warm welcome to you, my friend. So good to see both of you.
Good afternoon. Thank you.
I want to show you a poll here that's very interesting. You could argue maybe it's a little bit of an outlier. I'm not totally sure, but it shows that the Conservatives and Liberals deadlocked ahead of election day at 39% each. The NDP are at 10, 8% with the Bloc, and 3% with the Green Party. The People's Party doesn't seem to register there. It might, I think it may be on some other polls, so I don't want to discount them either. So I want to ask Marco first, what's your impression of that poll, and where do you think things are headed coming up on this Monday? And then I'll turn to you, Barbara.
Things are getting interesting indeed. If this is moderately accurate, it would mean that the Conservatives have been gaining about 3 points a day for the last couple of days, and that's pretty significant considering that there's still 4 days. Now, I'm not suggesting that that
Mhm,
trend is going to continue and they'll have 12 points up on the Liberals, but it could be. And the point is, the Conservatives um, need to get a lot more than that to form a majority government. That sort of going nose to nose with the Liberals isn't enough because the sort of lefty vote gets split by support with the NDP. So
mhm,
it'll depend on on a couple of things. The Conservatives heading still further north in those numbers. They need to outdo the Liberals, I think, by at least 5 points to get into a majority territory. And if the NDP's fortunes also turn around a little bit and go up, then the Conservatives could be in good territory. But the opposite is also true. If the NDP's support keeps slipping, and it has been fairly steadily going down, then that will benefit the Liberals, excuse me,
mhm,
regardless of the gains from the Conservatives, if the Conservative gains aren't very large. So the People's Party is clocking at around 1.5% in
mhm,
all the other polls that I have seen. That doesn't seem like much, but in some places it could be pretty significant because that would be a kind of a right of center vote that the Conservatives aren't getting. And in some places where things are really tight, that might be the
mhm.
difference between a seat or two, or not at all. So
Okay.
things are getting interesting.
It's a very interesting race. Barbara, any comment from you on this interesting race?
Yeah, I mean the polls, the number is 39, 39. I agree. If you start to parse it a little bit, it's great that I mean, it's nice to see the conservative numbers coming up. But if you look at the age ranges of who is
Mm,
creating those numbers, the conservatives are massively represented in it's the 18 to 29 group.
mhm,
uh, and then at age 45 to 59, you get equal representation between conservatives and liberals in that age
mhm,
group. And then beyond that, as you get older, it swings massively. So the one thing we know about boomers, and I'm even older than a boomer, is that they do go out and vote. And they vote in, I would say, almost 100%, or not 100%, but
Pretty
very high
close.
numbers. And we know that normally very young people uh, they tend to give a vote intention, but then they tend also not to vote. But this may be a different kind of election because the Gen Zer, right? At 18 to 29, they are highly motivated, and they're the ones that feel, I would say, I don't remember when young people have ever felt this motivated, that or felt more like stakeholders in the conservative platform. And of
So
course,
you're picking that up.
great big
So
push.
there's a number of things, takeaways here. There almost seems to be a geographical divide a little bit between the country, east and west. As Atlantic Canada, the east tends to go to liberal. Now you've got the bloc, and we come back to that in a moment. In Quebec, the battleground seems to be in Ontario. The west seems to be overwhelmingly towards the conservatives, not in all cases. But then there's this generational divide, Barbara, that you're alluding to. Do you think that's a fair comment that there is a generational divide emerging in this country, Marco? Is that your sense of it as well, based on
Yeah,
the stats?
that's what the polls have been picking up fairly consistently. Is that older people are significantly throwing their weight on towards the progressives, and the younger people, which seemed counterintuitive, 5 years ago. What is interesting also, and of course, I agree with Barbara. What is interesting is that I think for a long time, the younger crowd is very motivated as well to go vote.
Mm,
10 years ago, during the 2015 election, uh, Prime Minister, or would be Prime Minister at the time, Trudeau, managed to attract a significant amount of the younger vote on the
mhm,
promise that pot was going to be legalized. And so now the stakes for those people are greater. Needless to say, their ability to be able to purchase a house or find a house to purchase
mhm,
is significantly curtailed, and so their motivation is greater than whether or not smoking pot on
Yeah.
the street corner is allowed. So the motivation for them is infinitely greater, I would argue, and so
mhm,
we've seen perhaps that's what the numbers are indicating. Uh, you know, 25% more people voted in the advance voting polls this past Easter weekend, which is huge, right? Over 70 million people. That's about a quarter of those that are eligible to vote came out to vote, and that sends a signal that what we are about to see is a terrific voter turnout come Monday.
very
And
interesting.
yeah.
Matt C, by the way, says a comment, young people have been predominantly hurt by the last 10 years. And this is kind of what I was referring to as the income differential, not only between Canada and the United States, but obviously the issues of affordability have been in this election, as we've seen a lot of inflation, of course, generated by both a combination of, well, different policies that have impacted Canadians, including the printing of money, achieving record deficits. I mean, obviously that creates inflation. So there's a lot of people in this country that are hurting. Barbara, you had a comment?
I was going to add also that it's not just housing. Their career prospects are just
Mhm,
not. I just read a few statistics that actually shocked me. In that age group, there's extremely high unemployment, and there's a lot of that age group that is looking to move to the United States where they have more opportunities.
mm,
Apparently, for a university graduate in Canada, the average salary is like $63,000, and in the United
mhm,
States, the same graduate makes $113,000. The tax
mhm,
rate is lower, and their career prospects are greater. So, um, and also like in the STEM fields, all the people in the STEM fields,
mhm,
maths and sciences, who we expect the greatest productivity from. Apparently, 1 in 4 of STEM graduates say they intend to go or all have already left for the United States.
mhm,
So, in fact, the most innovation comes, money making innovation tends to come out of the scientific and
mhm,
engineering fields.
mhm.
This is not good at all. It's a very grim prospect if these statistics are correct, and I believe they are.
So I wanted to ask both of you, and I want to do this in a way that is very thoughtful. I don't want to be accused of, well, histrionics or drama. But how do you view this country from the bigger picture here? And I'm asking the audience as well. Is this, frankly, one of the most important elections in Canadian memory? I see it as a seminal moment in Canadian history as we kind of see, frankly, a country that's been in significant decline. And I can go through, frankly, study after study, report after statistic that shows that decline. So are we at that seminal point where is Canada going to continue with those policies that have led to that decline, or are we going to take another path of renewal? How do you see this? Marco, do you want to go first?
Sure. Um, I remember shortly after 2015, when I was at the time living in Halifax, I sort of commissioned somebody to look into what would be the effect of not having infrastructure continued to build in the country. And one of the things that this short little op-ed said was that it would have a crucial effect on national unity. So in 2016, you could already see that if you sort of are a keen observer of these things. Now, the reason why I started in 2014 is because what has happened in the last 10 years, of course, is significant to where we are. So the point that I want to make is uh, we are at a fork on the road in more ways than one, but on the issue of infrastructure and national unity, and those two things are related, and then all the accoutrements around those two things. If we project what we just seen behind us 10 years and project them another 10, you could see how much worse this could get in terms of absence of revenue, a stalled economy, the rising of crime, all the things that we have seen grow or not grow in the past, seeing them 10 years out into the future, this could be what makes or breaks this country, and it looks like it could be fatal.
Okay.
And
Barbara?
that's without taking into account the effect of both foreign interference and security issues at home. And I think MacDonald Laurier Institute, their security analyst, Joe Adam George, uh, he wrote a paper, and I actually just saw him in a webinar the other day. He said that the greatest internal security threat that Canada has is Islamism, and that it is being ignored by certainly by the Liberal Party. It has been ignored for the last 10 years, which has allowed the threat to grow. And we're talking about very well funded, very well organized movement. And that is of concern to me. And I think it should be of concern to more people. I noticed that at the leaders' debate, the English leaders' debate, the typically very cheeky Francois Blanchette used the word Islamism as a kind of baiting the hook. He wanted to discuss it, and it was like
No one touched it.
nobody wanted to touch that, so it just died. And I thought, whoa, that's kind of instructive.
No, it's very interesting. So we're talking about issues that perhaps people don't hear about that often, quite frankly, but these are nonetheless significant issues. We see not just simply the whole issue of radical Islam in Canada, but also we see issues related to Sikh nationalism. And I'm obviously, there's always that challenge when you have people, a world, a country as great as Canada. We have a myriad of people from different lands come here. It begs the issue what kind of vision we have to build a unity of identity that is peaceful, that is rational, that is within our traditions of our democratic traditions, and not just simply import those kinds of conflicts. I do want to highlight some very interesting comments from the audience here. Denver says, lest we forget, infrastructure was a problem under Stephen Harper as well, largely due to First Nations and transients. This compounds Canada's challenge, which appears to be constitutional in nature. And I think there's a lot of truth to what you're getting at, Denver, and well said. So, also, I have a comment here. The Canadian government tech needs to be upgraded and updated. Yeah, well said. Um, Robert Kerr says, I like the concept that with 7.3 million people showing up for early voting, this is an indication people want change versus the status quo. Yeah, that's a really great question and point, Robert. So on this note about infrastructure, I want to underline a special announcement that the Frontier Center's made. We've, of course, been talking about the importance of infrastructure in many different forms to build this great country, but also in the context of getting energy from Canada, namely oil and gas, to world markets so we can get world prices. So the bottom line here is you may not know this. Many Canadians are not aware of this. And it's frankly kind of a scandal. We, as a country, tend to have one customer for our oil and gas, namely the United States. So we are a price taker, not a price maker. We don't get those world markets. So Dr. Marco Navarro-Genie has headed up capably a panel of experts to come up with, I think, a brilliant model. And you can see this on our website that we can bring this up here just as a picture of it. And you can see a live counter showing the money that we are forfeiting because the cost of underselling Canadian oil and gas to the United States is horrendous. It's about almost $30 billion that we forfeit every year. So I'm going to turn to you, Marco, because I'm very proud of you and the team that have worked on this. Why did you develop this counter?
Uh, we were looking for a way to sort of demonstrate in a sort of visual 1 second look, if you will, at the magnitude of the problem. And one of the things that people will find when they get to the website, so right now, if they go to fcpp.org, the press release is sort of on the half left of the panel, and they can click there, and that takes them to the landing page on the oil and gas issue. Is that 26 and change billion dollars buys a lot of stuff. So so we try to illustrate the nature of the loss on a daily basis, and then we sort of add it on a monthly basis and a yearly basis so that people can have an idea. And then if they scroll down below, what people are going to find is sort of the shocking, basically things that we are foregoing, or we could be foregoing, or we have foregone for lack of that money. So, for example, a couple of years back, the government decided that we needed more fighter jets, and we do. Right now, we have these CF-18s that are nearly half a century old, and if we had to fly them to, never mind the north, but to the American border because there was a threat there, they might not get there without a couple of pit stops, or they just fall right out of the sky. And I say that not in disrespect to the armed forces, but simply is sort of equipment that is old. And so we decided to buy these F-35s, which are replacements for these fighter jets. And we bought 88 of them, or that is the number that we plan to. Well, with the differential on just crude oil alone, which is $19 billion, we could pay for every single one of those aircraft in 1 year. Right.
Wow.
Now, the other thing that we need to point out is that in this sort of spat about trade with the United States, that money that we are not getting, we're not getting it, and it isn't going to some Korean guy, and it isn't going to some French guy. That money is going to a series of middlemen who are in the United States. They're Americans. So
in the United States.
Yes. So these folks buy our oil at a discount of about, on the average, about $20 a barrel less. And then they send it down to the Gulf, where they can actually fetch international prices and sell it at a profit, right? So
Mind-boggling.
that's the money that we're losing, but the money that we're losing is essentially lining the pockets of middlemen in the United States.
It's just stunning. It's hard to comprehend these dollar amounts when you think of almost $30 billion. And I want to do the caveat that it's a dynamic number, but take a look at that counter. And I encourage you to share it with your friends, your family, and say, look, the punchline is that this policy has been largely deliberate. in the sense that we've had the last 10 years a war, a policy war on oil and gas. That is a fact. That's why we've had Bill C-69. You've got the so-called greenwashing bills where the industry can't even talk about its environmental records without fear of being prosecuted and criminalized. Like it just goes on and on. So a key question then is during this election, which path are we going to take? Are we going to continue with the last 10 years of that war on oil and gas? Or are we going to actually capitalize and fully build that industry? And I think that's a key difference in the party platforms. Is that your read on that as well, Barbara?
Uh, well, according to, I mean, we know that Pierre Poilievre is all in favor of, getting the pipelines and getting our riches, our wealth out of the ground and to customers in Europe and everywhere that we can. And
Mhm,
Mark Carney says that he wants to do that. But I don't think he wants to do that. I think
mhm,
his entire career has been built on his values, as he said in the book, are environmental. That is his top concern. And he thinks that the moral thing to do is to keep the stuff in the ground. So I think
mhm,
he knows he has to get it out of the ground, but it's hedged round still with all kinds of uh, you know, uh, regulatory
mhm,
and values based assessments and all the rest. I don't think it's going to get out of the ground as quickly as
mhm,
people imagine that it will.
mhm.
I'm sure Marco knows more about this than I do, but
Yeah, but there's a lot of caveats here. So it's clarity is very important for candidates and platforms. So that's one of the things that is it seems to be pointing in the direction that the war on Canadian oil and gas will continue from
I
at
think
least
so.
my perspective. Now, the other thing that's fascinating is that a number of polls have been undertaken regarding the willingness of Canadians to support the building of more pipelines. That's the remedy to this absurd
Mhm.
situation is build the infrastructure. Let's move. 78%, 80% of Canadians seem to be in favor. Now, the exception is what about Quebec? Because the candidate there, the blocks, I mean, and Barbara, you're coming in from Montreal here. What's your read on that attitude of like the bloc seems to be picking up steam here, but
Yes,
they've been consistently against these pipelines. Is that correct?
they are consistently against the pipelines, but I could see from what I mean, Francois Blanchet and the politicians in Quebec that are the premier, they're starting to read the room. And Quebecers are very, very nervous right
Mhm,
now about the United States. They have always pegged Quebec's refusal to allow a pipeline on the idea that there's no what they call social acceptance in Quebec for a
mm,
pipeline. Well, since when is a social acceptance, part of the policy making? But well, let's set that aside. They have used that as an excuse. I think there is a great deal more social acceptance, and I think they know there is a great deal more because it's a survival issue, and they know that our prosperity. I mean, once Trump entered the picture, the social acceptance angle got a little harder to defend. I don't think that. I think that is changing, and I think that the fact that the bloc's fortunes in Quebec are now rising means that he's not blowing that horn at all. Like he's not talking about,
mm,
well, we're going to keep keep the feds out of our territory with the pipelines. I don't hear that. I
mm.
think
Okay,
I think they'll be very much in favor of the pipeline when the light shines a certain way and you recognize that, it's sink or swim and
interesting.
the
Marco?
pipeline has to go through. That issue will change. But I'm very glad to see that the bloc is picking up steam, not because I'm a separatist, but because I think my own preference would be. I mean, I know I feel the liberals are definitely going to win. My preference would obviously be for a minority government. A strong minority government could be very effective in countering some of the more profligate policies that Mr. Carney would. What is it going to be, a $230 billion deficit? I mean, he's proposing, I think, quite irresponsible, expenditures in line with the kind of thinking that Justin Trudeau had. But Quebec does make a very efficient counterpunch to liberal governments. I kind of like the way they react in Parliament. They keep the Liberals on their toes, let's just say. So I don't think it'd be such a bad thing.
Okay, Marco, any comment about will we see more pipelines, and what are your thoughts on Quebec?
I think Quebecers are certainly kind of turning around more than they used to. I agree with Barbara. Even in among the separatists or the sovereignist population in Quebec, there's been more and more rah Canada with all these Trump conflicts, and so that has the potential to change the equation. I cringe a little bit, and because someone from the audience posted a comment about, there were no pipelines during Harper, and that is true, and that danger, by the way, remains. That governments, regardless of their color and political persuasion, are anchored by the desire of the people where the population is most numerous in this country, and that's typically sort of the Laurentian Valley, Quebec and Ontario. And so, if those sentiments were to change and were to be pro-pipeline all of a sudden, we could start building pipelines, and that's great. But if they changed within a year or so, those projects would die on the vine, so to speak. And so the part that worries me about all this is the fickleness in the situation, and the fact that because it takes an enormous amount of resources and commitment to build these things over years, the fact that there is currently a more or a greater proclivity towards building pipelines, I worry that could change just as easily.
All right. Well, it's a very interesting discussion. Can we get our act together not only on energy, but a myriad of other areas? And it's fascinating. This past week, we, of course, came across an interesting report within the bowels of the federal government, one that if you read the report, it was very careful to qualify it as not as an opinion officially of the federal government. But nonetheless, it's interesting that this, quote, internal group of researchers within the federal government released it at this time. And basically, the report has a fairly dystopian view of Canada and its trajectory towards the year 2040. Some of the themes that highlighted, as you may recall, was that it characterizes a land divided between the haves and have-nots, a nation where university education and home ownership are only for the wealthy, a country with a mental health crisis, a state where people hunt and forage in order to feed themselves, and a country that frankly has a bleak future. Now, this is, of course, within different, quote, hypothetical scenarios. What I found interesting as I read the report was that the report actually, for many in this country, describes what's frankly happening today, where so many Canadians are struggling with day-to-day costs. And so I was curious, do you think that has really come up in the Canadian consciousness that if we continue these kinds of existing policies, this is exactly the future that the Canadians are going to experience? Or am I being too dramatic? Any comment, Barbara?
I don't think you're being too dramatic at all. I think it is very clear that this is a class divide. It's as much as an age divide. I think the there's the age divide of older people who bought their homes, like 50 years ago. It's their equity. It's great equity. They feel, they got their RSPs. They got they had the good life. They've had a very good
Mhm.
life, and they want that Canada in their nostalgic. They want they want a party that is going to defend the institutions that created a good life for them.
Mhm.
So the younger people who don't know that life, and Pierre Poilievre is saying to them, he's I think Mr. Carney is presenting himself as somebody who will defend those institutions,
Mhm.
and he will defend a way of life that is very familiar to boomers. But I think Pierre Poilievre's whole endeavor and his whole campaign has been about, um, uh, he is fighting against 10 lost years, and those institutions failed young
Mhm.
Canadians. So they have no love for the institutions that older people, secure people, have a great deal of nostalgia for. So I feel very much for them. And a lot of those young people are, I think there's a class divide. Educated people, as you say, educated people who have respect for other educated people. And they move in certain circles where if you don't have a university degree, that's kind of, mm, that's why the trucker convoy, it
Mhm.
attracted so much wrath from
Mhm.
a certain kind of, not just Mr. Carney and Trudeau, who were convinced that everybody in the trucker convoy was racist, but which was not the case at all. But Mr. Carney got quite passionate about the trucker convoy. He said he wrote an article for the Globe and Mail saying it was like an insurrection. It
Mhm.
was it was
Mhm.
it was such an alarmist
Mhm.
article. He says they have to be punished to the full extent of the law.
Mhm.
Um, it's like these are working class people, lower middle class people, some of them,
Mhm. Mhm.
truckers. It aroused a kind of almost like, remember Hillary with her deplorables
Mhm.
and Obama with his guns and religion talk.
Mhm.
It was so divisive. That was one of the reasons why the trucker convoy was so divisive. But I think we're seeing a lot of that same attitude, that Mr. Carney has these. He's very credentialed. He's very credentialed, and that's very soothing
Mhm.
to a lot of these Laurentian chattering class elites.
Mhm.
They like that. They find it very reassuring. And so there's this tremendous
Mhm.
gap in what voters are looking for, depending on their age, their
Mhm.
educational class,
Mhm.
and
Well, and quite frankly, Barbara, I describe them as the good and the great. They really do believe that they have a moral superiority and a
I agree.
expertise, if you will, the technocrats who believe that they can run other people's lives and do so competently and
Mhm.
rightfully and morally. And I find this incredibly disconcerting and certainly not in keeping with the Canadian tradition of respecting the individual rights and freedoms of people, and that every individual is made in the image of the divine, regardless of whether or not you're a believer or not. So that's my speech for the day.
Yeah,
What
yeah.
do you think,
Can I
Margot?
just add? I think it was a very
Yeah.
telling thing that when Pierre Poilievre said that he was going to drop the necessity for a university degree in order to go into the civil service,
Hmm. Hmm.
and I said to myself, Pierre, that's really fantastic. That is so
Hmm.
great, because I would say that I don't know how many, 50%, 75% of civil service jobs can be learned on the job. I mean, if you
Hmm.
can use a computer, which 10-year-olds can better than I can, certainly, you can pick up training on the job. It's not most civil service jobs are not rocket science. And I think,
Hmm.
but I heard, just anecdotally, people were saying, "Oh, that's terrible. What do you mean? Like, of
Hmm.
course you need a university education to
Yeah.
go."
Well, and the irony is that you need to look at the curriculum of many university degrees today, given their DEI lens and what they teach in this curriculum, and ask yourself, is the degree worth anything
Yeah,
today?
it's one of the
Uh,
institutions that have failed
mm,
young people.
yeah.
I mean, if you look around at all the institutions, that you can't get a GP in this country, and you can't,
Mhm,
universities are not teaching people and our STEM standards have fallen
mhm.
compared to.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's the story of public education today.
Yeah.
So, Marco, any comment on our discussion that we're having here?
There's a lot in there, and all very substantive. I think Barbara has done a great job of sort of painting the big picture and the sort of the generational divide. But it's not just generational; it's educational. There's a whole
Mhm,
bunch of different things that come into play here. And what is interesting, in a kind of paradoxical sort of way, is that the progressives are standing in the way of progress and in the way of change. They want to keep
mm,
things the way they are. They want to,
interesting.
pardon the pun, conserve things the
Mm.
way that they are.
Mhm,
And the conservatives, who normally have been, the shoe has been on the other foot, are the ones that are driving change, that are representing the pent up energy of these newer
mhm. Right.
generations, and people who look. We've known for years that um, that people without a university degree uh, are are not necessarily disadvantaged in the ways that we understood them. Bill Gates never got a university degree. There's lots of people who are extremely capable, and perhaps they are extremely capable precisely because they did not go to university. And I say that having gone to university way too long. But the reality remains, as Barbara points out, that if you're going to work in a passport office, for example, why do you need a bachelor's degree in DEI or feminist studies or
Mhm,
whatever? Never mind,
mhm,
some of them actually have graduate degrees. So if I was just going to say that you don't need a bachelor's degree, we should ban people from most of those jobs from
mhm.
having graduate degrees unless the job actually requires it, right?
Yeah.
And so, but they're completely mesmerized, right? Whereas 10 years ago, they were over the moon with somebody because he was basically one of them, a little school teacher with semi decent hair. Now all of a sudden is the guy with the PhD, who, by the way, the guy with the PhD is doing the exact same thing that the previous guy did to wreck the economy.
Mhm.
So much for the PhD in economics. There are so many sort of intersections here, but what is really visible here is that there is a kind of tectonic movement politically and ideologically in the country.
Well said. I'm seeing so many comments come in on the chat here. It's very interesting. If I go above there, it says a comment about, well, here is an interesting sub says, I am a boomer and I went and voted Sunday, attending in line with almost all boomers. They were all praising Polyev. Okay, interesting. Well, we'll see where the vote ends up. So that's what's interesting, right? There's a
I
lot
bet
of people
he
thinking,
wasn't in Toronto.
yes. Then we have also comments about who built this country, saying that it was skilled people. It wasn't people with degrees per se. Well, and honestly, I don't mean to vilify people with university degrees. I have a couple, but I do want to say that I think one has to be very critical today of universities that have played such an example of institutions that, in my humble opinion, are generally off the rails as they seek, yes, exactly, they're indoctrination centers, not ones that really focus on the, what is it again? Oh, yes, the search for truth, critical thinking. And this is shown through, I think, a lot of brilliant reports. And I'm certainly one that has worked in different sectors of our society, including universities and polytechnics, which are very different than universities. But you see in the universities, so many of the faculty are all in as devout Marxists. I mean, this is in the story of the humanities today. It's no secret. So how are you providing any diversity of intellectual thought. I mean, this is absurd. Diversity and equity and inclusion based on so-called superficial signs like your skin color of all things, which is racism, versus intellectual diversity. I mean, this is the story. So part of rebuilding this country and renewing it, I would say on every level, involves these institutions. And I think many Canadians are figuring out that our institutions are a bit rotten.
Hmm.
And you'd have to look at each one. I know there's a lot of good people in them, but we've got a very serious problem in our country. And that's all reflected, I think, in the level of prosperity we have and the quality of discussion. I mean, look at the media today in this election. And surely this is one of the elephants in the room, is that the legacy media has some of the lowest credibility figures because people know that some 2,000 outlets are funded significantly by this federal government. They've all got to sign off on those three things: diversity, equity, inclusion, how they define Indigenous reconciliation. What's the third one? Oh yeah, climate change and alarmism, if you want to frame it up that way. So this is, we can't function as a higher order democracy and have the debates that we need if our legacy media is all in on continuing their funding. Isn't that a problem?
Absolutely. And, one of the things that I learned early in my school days, and I was like the Pope we talked about. I was educated by Jesuits, and learned to ask the question, what is the goal of this thing? What is the purpose of this thing?
Indeed.
Right?
Yes.
And so when we look at the basic institutions of government, we just simply learned recently that the country can get along just fine without parliament, right? We shut it down during COVID.
Yeah.
It's been shut down for a while. And has it been any sort of materially different in our lives? No, not really. What is the purpose of universities? Well, the purpose of university used to be the pursuit of truth. And then we had this wave of people who came to work in them and said, truth doesn't really matter. That should have been the day we shut them down and we closed them all, right?
Exactly.
And,
Yes.
if the purpose of the police is to keep people safe, and the police is not doing that, we would ask serious questions about them. And so again, in many of these institutions, whether they're judicial, they're governmental, they're educational, they no longer serve their initial purpose for which they were created. And so that means that we either take them over and turn them inside out and return them to their original purpose, or really shut them down, find something else to do.
What do you say, Barbara? Should we shut
Well,
down some
yeah,
of
I
these
mean,
universities?
I'm with you philosophically, very much so. And I think that if this election had been held in the absence of Trump's, you know,
Shadow.
his show,
Yeah.
it would have been I think these arguments would have fallen very much more, they would be much more appealing. But there's a large swath of the people for whom fear became
Mm.
a much greater motivator than reason. And fear is a great motivator. I mean, when I saw the polls, we all remember that Polyev was on track to have a majority government. And I mean, it was going to be quite a significant, people were talking about landslides and all that. And it changed in a heartbeat because of Trump. And I think people were just so gripped by fear. So the worst didn't happen. So now, that alleviated somewhat. But I think still the whole lens through which people were looking at the country changed, and everything that they could see very clearly before that we had a lost decade. All these things you've mentioned, people had a totally open mind about them. It's almost like it all just blurred away to insignificance amongst the great swath of the
Okay.
population, not the
So
young people. Yeah.
I should explain. I'm having a delightful, incisive, challenging conversation with my two friends, Barbara K. Columnist with the National Post, and Dr. Marco Navarro-Genie, Vice President of Policy and Research at Frontier. and of course with our audience. So we're kind of getting towards the last part of our conversations. We've covered an awful lot of ground, my friends. And I think this is certainly one of the points in this election is that's been a key takeaway, hasn't it? There's been all kinds of divides, geographical, demographic,
Gender,
maybe
gender.
education, gender. Gender is another one,
Yes.
but also the use of fear. And we certainly have talked about this before, a la Orange Man Bad, a la Donald Trump, the president of the United States, weighing in with missives. And that has been capitalized on
Mhm.
by the brilliant, perhaps cynical political strategists who want to cling to power. Because it is a remarkable story, isn't it, that with a 20-point lead within the conservative echelons just a few months ago, that it's down to where it is. So that's played a big role, hasn't it? Is the playing up of the fear. I know that Mr. Carney's made many statements about how the relationship with the United States is over, which is, obviously an absurd statement to make, in my humble opinion, because our economies are so integrated and we've been long allies and friends. But, obviously in the United States, they're going through a reset financially and otherwise. It's a geopolitical one as well, where they don't want, well, NATO freeloaders like Canada. That everybody knows that. I mean, it's kind of like, how do you defend not carrying your load in NATO? It's been a great deal for us because we can just plow that money into other things like buying people's votes, arguably. Or am I being too cynical about that, Marco?
Well, I think what we require is a little bit more cynicism sometimes. Um, we have lived for generations, and I know I used to be one of them, who thought best of most of our institutions, who thought best of many of these things that we looked around. I used to be, um, I consider myself a great defender of law enforcement, for example. I
Mm,
lived in
mhm,
Montreal for a while, where sometimes the police, committed abuses and whatnot, but that's no reason to take the police down and erase them.
mhm,
I used to be, pretty good believer in not the kindness, but the usefulness of government, and that government wasn't acting against us. That sometimes it oversteps its boundaries, and
mhm,
there were abuses, but generally speaking, I could trust that government would serve my best interests. I don't believe that anymore. Um,
mhm,
COVID, if nothing else, kind of ripped
mm,
the
mhm,
veil from in front of my eyes, and I realize now that without sounding conspiratorial, because a lot of these things happened in tandem, but not necessarily in concert. Um,
mm, mhm,
that people in institutions uh, follow their own interests, that again they have sort of lost the purpose of the institutions they're working for, and lost the plot that these institutions are supposed to serve the people in this society. So a little bit more cynicism earlier on would have helped me. I'm certainly glad that I have found a little bit more now, but I think the situation requires it.
Okay, interesting. We need a bit more cynicism, Barbara. What do you say?
Oh, I think she froze. Oh,
Yeah.
no.
Okay. There
Barbara, I
you
asked you the question, do you think Marco's onto something that we in fact need to be a little bit more cynical instead of just our elbows up? Maybe we need to open our eyes up a bit with some of these
we definitely have to
institutions.
open our eyes up. I think a lot's going on. One of the biggest things that happened, although I don't even know if we're aware of just how big a thing it was um, when Justin Trudeau said we are a post-national country.
Mm, mhm,
I've had so much time to think about that, and what
mm,
to me it was a very seismic thing to say, and my heart sank when he said it, because this
mhm,
whole idea that you have to be a globalist to be a thinking, all thinking people are globalists, and that's the way we have to think. And that's another divide. That's another
mm,
divide. I think Stephen Harper in his book said uh, there are the anywhere people and the somewhere people. The anywhere people are like Mark Carney. They're at home in airplanes. They're at home in Davos. They're at home going to international meetings. They love the United Nations. They love international
Yes.
organizations.
Yeah.
If it's international, it automatically has a certain panache and a certain gravitas, and that we have to listen. And I think we have seen just in the last couple of years the failures, the utter abysmal failure of so many United Nation agencies and criminal courts. And I mean, yes, we have to be more cynical because the cynicism that we see in these international institutions themselves is so absolute, that we would be stupid not to be cynical. And that convinced me, when he said those words. I said, no, 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 no. We have to be more national. And when you're national, you worry about your own defense. You worry about whether your military is crumbling and can't fill its
Mhm. Mhm.
dormitories, its barracks, because people don't want to be in it. They don't feel welcome. They don't feel that if they're, uh, just a white boy from a small town, that they're as welcome, say, as,
Mhm.
a trans woman, who's disabled or something. I don't know. I think this whole DEI thing is part of a global, part of that globalism of minority rights and only minority rights. I'm sort of, I think I'm not being very coherent at this point, but this idea that the globalists know better because they can see the whole world and they see what's needed, and how we have to contribute. And of course, the environmentalists are all globalists. So even though we only produced 0.002% of the world's, you know, emissions, we have to cut off all our wealth. We have to become poor so that we can save the world. But we're not saving the
Mhm.
world. It wouldn't matter if we never, if we went around in horse and buggies. I mean, we would not be saving the world one little bit. So this whole idea that global, and Mark Carney is the absolute globalist, and Pierre Poilievre is the nationalist, who
Mhm.
believes in the nation state, and it's still the most effective way to protect its citizens
Mhm.
is to believe in the nation state and not
Mhm.
being part of this world, this
Mhm.
nameless, institutionally top down, um, way of governance. It's for me, it's a
Mhm.
very depressing idea that we will go through another 4 years of this nonsense, this globalist nonsense.
But
Yeah.
well said. So again, there's a different divide of the philosophy. Are you a globalist or a nationalist? I'm not saying that there isn't some hybrid, but essentially, globalism I've always seen as the great workaround to democracy and accountability and transparency, working together as a nation. Why? Because we're not just simply a nation, we're a community of people who really believe that our traditions and values matter and are unique, that we might build not only a more prosperous society, but one that is better respecting of the tradition of individual rights and freedoms. And I think this is really what is the divide that is happening today, that is more and more apparent and open for everyone to see if they would open their eyes. And I think this is, in that way, not just a policy discussion, this is truly a policy decision that relates to what kind of future we're going to create and what kind of values and traditions that we hold dear.
Yeah. Yeah. Barbara made me think of a fellow Montrealer, Thomas Darcy McGee.
Mm,
Um, a couple of weeks ago, we published a short little paper here at the Frontier Center, authored by John von Hiking, arguing that the source of our patriotism should be the love and the understanding of the institutions that created this country. And so, just last week, by the way, was the 200th anniversary of the birth of Thomas Darcy McGee. And Darcy McGee was a radical revolutionary. He was a Fenian who uh, basically wanted to try to draw the United States into a war with Britain, and they were trying to sort of attack Canada and push Canada into that war. Darcy McGee came to Montreal in the 1850s, and by the 1864 conference, he was basically he had become one of the fathers of this country. And he became one of the fathers of this country on the premise that he understood that if people, and these are, I'm paraphrasing, that if people came to this country to fight the wars and the hatreds and the animosities that they had in the old country, that this project called Canada was going to fall apart and
Mm,
destroy it.
yeah,
That he was very much interested in urging people to leave these things behind, learn to love the institutions that make up the new state, and learn to live with one another, uh, totally abstracted of that past, and looking forward to what he called a new northern nationality. In other
that's
words,
right.
a
Yeah.
new identity. And what Justin did in 2015 with that phrase was essentially rebuke Darcy McGee, shoot him
Mhm.
again, in a sense, kill him again, and set aside, jettison the national project that the founders of this country started in 1964 and concluded, well, not concluded, it never concludes, but held in 1867 in the 1867 Constitution. So I urge people to follow von Heyking's advice to go and read the founding debates of this country. They're in a tightly edited, well put together book called that, the founding debates, and read Darcy McGee. Um, the other connection, of course, going back to something that Barbara said earlier about the Islamists. Uh, Hamas are today's Fenians. Uh,
Mm.
they are about to rip or have the potential to rip this country apart
Mhm.
by having imported all those hatreds from somewhere else. And so Darcy McGee has become way more important than he has been since the 1860s today.
Yeah, that's a great historical reference, Marco. I will give a shout out to Darcy McGee's, a great pub in Ottawa that was actually operated with Darcy McGee, and he was assassinated just outside the doorsteps of that storied restaurant. And
Mm.
that is coming up on its anniversary, as I recall. I think his funeral was and May the 9th in Montreal. I think there was well over 50,000 in attendance,
Yeah, it
if
was
memory serves me
April
correctly.
18th, I think,
April 18, I stand
1868.
corrected, but remarkable history that we would be wise to remember as we think about those founding speeches. So well done. Look, we're wrapping up here with our far-reaching just conversation with Barbara Kay and Marco Navarro-Genie, and we really appreciate the comments, and please make sure you like the conversation and share it. If you believe these conversations are important, then share it. This is the time. And it's very interesting. Really appreciate the affirmations of the conversation here. Um, I mean, it's just remarkable the level of comments here. And one thing I did want to cite here is a sense of hope. I mean, I think that in this conversation, it's easy to perhaps say, well, is this all bad news? By the way, Sue says, great conversation as usual. Thank you so much to everybody for your affirmations. Um, this conversation isn't meant to be a downer. It's meant to try to get at the reality of the policy choices that we face as we care not just about our country, but frankly love each other as Canadians. I mean, it's kind of what it boils down to, isn't it? Do we love each other? I mean that in a big way. So sincerely, at the Frontier, we released this week, I think, a brilliant list of a 12-point plan for renewal. And some of it is, I'm sure, not a surprise to you. like open, free, and internal markets. Imagine that. Free trade within this country. Restore energy and industrial freedom, just as kind of we were talking about. Comprehensive fiscal and tax reform. Where does money flow? It goes downhill. And if we can't be competitive, it's going to flow right out of this country. Industrial competition and productivity agenda. There's all kinds of things. And please look at it on our website. Be sure to subscribe to our newsletter. And one of them is restore national identity, symbols, and citizenship. So this is a great list. I know, Marco, you got a lot of feedback from the team at Frontier, and I think it's a marvelous list. And I just encourage anybody, because it's in the spirit of being nonpartisan and thinking what is going to serve to build this country. So let this be an enduring point that, well, maybe we should all put it to memory. So I want to highlight that. So Marco, did you want to highlight anything from that list as well?
Um, we could talk about this for hours. This is something that I know it's tagged under my name on the website. I kind of put it together, but as you
That
well
was
point
great.
out, David, thank you. It was sort of I received the feedback from a great number of people who are affiliated with the Frontier Center, and sort of we put it together that way. One of the things that perhaps is most unusual and perhaps most innovative in this list is under number 3, comprehensive fiscal and tax reform. And this has been a kind of a Frontier Center for Public Policy staple idea to basically move away from equalization. And there are ways to do that without letting the provinces out on a lurch with no money. And that is transferring the GST tax points to the provinces, or if you will, in sort of more common language, let that the federal government should allow the provinces to keep all the GST collected. And what that would do is it would bring the equalization need to a halt, but also would provide the incentive for provinces to actually want to grow their economies, because the more they grow the economies, then the more tax revenue they receive. Right now, the equalization system has all the perverse incentives that the people who receive it not wanting to grow their economies, because the more shrunken their economies, or the least active their economies, the more money they receive. And so it's completely the wrong incentives for a market society.
Exactly. Yeah, so that equalization refers to the transfer of money from provinces to province to other provinces that through a fancy, complicated formula get a lot of money. So Quebec is the largest recipient, in all fairness to the Quebec that we love. But also other provinces. Manitoba is a significant recipient, as well as others in eastern provinces. So come on, let's get on with it. And because let's be clear here, and this is where I think your earlier point, Marco, about unity as a nation. If we go down a path that continues the war on oil and gas in this country, not only will it do irreparable harm to our economy, I would suggest, but also, why would any rational province, namely Alberta and Saskatchewan, remain in this country? I don't understand that. And I again, am I being overly dramatic in this assessment, Barbara? Am I?
I can understand the sentiment and the people talking about why would we want to stay in this country. I don't think that there's a viable way for them to leave the country. That's the only problem. And I'm not sure it's a great idea to be constantly thinking of secession. I mean, when you start getting a lot of, and I know a lot of people do, and I know I personally get a lot of mail or on X, people talking about Quebec. They really hate Quebec. The West, people in the West, like really seriously hate Quebec. But I will say about Quebec is Quebec is a nation. I mean, it's a nation within a nation.
Indeed, yes.
But it is because it's preserved. It has a very strong. You talk about symbols and identity, and well, in from what I see, Quebec is the only province in Canada that actually rejects multiculturalism and rejects the idea that everybody's as good as everybody else, and everybody's point of view is as good as everybody other's point of view, and nobody's values are better than other values, which I think is a kind of pernicious idea. That's part of that globalist idea, that no, you want to get away from that national thing. They never got away from the national thing. Always had a strong sense of wanting to be a real nation. Uh, uh, but even people that are not separatists, they still see themselves as a nation, and I think that they have all the attributes of a nation. So I feel, okay, I'm a minority in a nation, and in my opinion, they have a much healthier sense of who they are because they are different, because they've preserved a language, they've preserved many, even though they rejected the church largely, they've still preserved many of the national characteristics that formed them. So culturally speaking, they're the strongest province in this country. And I think a lot of the things that they do should be emulated.
I agree. But I have a big different view about nations, because nations are common identities, and I do agree that Quebec is a nation. They have a common national conscience. That's not the case in the rest of this country. And in fact, our constitution recognizes at least Quebec as a nation, the Acadians as a nation, the Métis as a nation. There are nearly 630 something individual Aboriginal nations in this country. And so that really signifies that Canada is not a nation. Canada is at best a multinational state. Meaning it is a territory governed by a single government in which there are many, many different identities. And one of those identities is this Western or this prairie Western identity, largely expressed, I think, in terms of Alberta and Saskatchewan, BC being sort of a different consciousness, and parts of Manitoba are sort of falling within that view. And that's what makes this state so difficult to keep together and to govern, because we have so many broad and different visions of what we should be. We're about to see it either way, expressed, for example, in the vote on Monday. If the polls are mildly correct, we're going to see large swaths of red in many provinces, but we're going to see a sea of blue right here in the landlocked area. So that doesn't mean, by the way, that we could not be together, that we could not recuperate the glue that once held this place together. But it's not a national identity. There has to be something else.
Indeed.
And let's just one more thing, David, that this country was put together by infrastructure, was glued together by infrastructure, namely the train. And so now we don't even have that. We cannot even build infrastructure to keep us together.
Well point. Great discussion. I notice, Madam Producer, D.J. Smith said a very interesting comment, and I think it's one that comes up a lot here. Don't self-delude yourselves. The 51st state is a very visible exit path for Alberta and Saskatchewan. Viable, pardon me. We are way more culturally aligned with U.S. states than Eastern Canada. Now, it's interesting. As someone very familiar with the Clarity Bill, or Clarity Act, does that not provide, a la Quebec's incredible example, of a way to say goodbye?
There is a way. Yes, the Clarity Bill
is a way.
Yes.
Right? And that combined with the Alberta Act for independence. I mean, I think there's a lot of footholds to really bring this debate to a fore and lay it on the line, quite frankly, and say, how is Canada working, or is it broken if we don't have the ability to have our economies function, be able to get infrastructure done, if you've got a federal government that's constantly meddling in provincial affairs? So what is good for the goose is good for the gander. So let's carry on and see where this comes out on Monday.
Well, part of the the sort of obtuseness of the 51st state, or Canadians who are in favor of it, is this idea that Alberta and Saskatchewan would be at home in the United States. There is nothing further. Uh, I couldn't possibly think of anything further from the mindset of an Albertan or a Saskatchewanese than somebody in New York or in Boston, for example, right? And
Mhm.
so the axes of connections in North America are not east and west; they're north and south. Um,
Mhm.
you know, Torontonians are more like New Yorkers, and Haligonians are more like Bostonians, and Albertans are more like the people in Montana and Idaho, in the same way that British Columbians are more like the northwestern states in the United
That is
States,
true. That is
and
true.
yeah, and so. I live in Alberta, but I have lived in the far east of this country. I also grew up in Montreal. I've seen the different regions and understand sort of this sort of regional mindset. And Us Albertans have more in common with somebody in Montana than somebody in
Yes,
Halifax,
that
right?
is true.
Yeah, and so this idea that Alberta is suddenly going to be right at home as the 51st state is a bit of pie in the sky.
All right. Well, this has been one heck of a conversation. I want to thank you, Barbara Kay and Marco Navarro-Genie, for this incredible conversation. And with our audience, you've had many thoughtful questions and comments. I really appreciate it. I chuckle as well at a number of the comments, including in this age of elbows up. Rita makes a comment, heads up, everyone. I like that one.
Heads up.
And I think that's an invitation to think critically, to be wise in our discussions about public policy and the choices that we make to build this great country. So, on that note, I wish everybody a terrific week, and is certainly thinking of our nation as we look to Monday's election. Be sure to keep covering, uh, be sure to watch Merit TV Canada's coverage about the election. You can find Merit on the cable networks across the country, from Bell MTS Fiber TV in Manitoba, Ontario East, and of course by satellite and Rogers Cable, and of course on many TELUS networks across the country. So be sure to watch that. We also have lots of information on the Frontier website, so be sure to look at that, as well as the energy discount calculator that we talked about today, and those 12 ideas to build this country. So on that note, I want to thank everyone for joining this conversation, and we'll see you next week.
Vote early and vote often.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you for watching